I'm Cherise Selly, and here today with me on behalf of Restore Innocence, I have two very, very special people in my presence. And I would like to introduce Annika and her mentor, Diane. And thank you both for being here. These are two very special people, and we would like to share a little bit more about a very challenging topic, honestly, something that's hard to talk about, but something that I would love to bring more light to for our community, and that's about human trafficking. And as we're shooting this podcast and we're going into the month of January, Annika, you shared with me that January is actually National Human Trafficking Month, and that January 11th is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day. So with that said, Annika, thank you for being so brave and sharing your story and your life's journey and all the stuff that you've overcome in your life. You have already been an inspiration to me. Can you share with people what trafficking actually means? A lot of us are in the dark about it.
So human trafficking is when a third party is making a profit off another person, and that's through sex trafficking or labor trafficking, and they use force, fraud, and coercion to do that. So force can be anything you can think of physically, that physical restraints or physical beatings, harm, violence, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. Fraud can be a false promise or a lie or something of that nature. This can include also false regulations to immigration or legal status of how people can be in the U.S. Or there is coercion. Now, this is including things like manipulation and the mental pieces of those mental chains you think of, like threatens to the family, threatens to their lives, things of that nature.
Okay. So will you share a little bit with us about what actually happened in your past? Where did you begin with having this life of sex trafficking? What happened? Where did it begin?
Well, I think that every victim or survivor of human trafficking has like a backstory before the trafficking begins. And usually that includes some form of abuse at home or something of that nature that got them into the hands of a trafficker who preys on those vulnerabilities. So for me, my mom, she was a single teen mom growing up, and there was a lot of neglect because she was working multiple jobs, and there was also a lot of emotional abuse in my childhood. My dad wasn't present. He's an alcoholic, and he lived out of state from me for most of my childhood, but those were some of those beginning steps that automatically made me vulnerable to a trafficker from before I turned 10, really. Wow. Realistically.
You became a survivor very, very early in your life.
Oh, I was trafficked at 18, so.
Wow.
But, yeah.
So with that backstory, and the feeling of abandonment that you probably had very early in your life, where did you go? Did you stay in one place? Did you move around as a child?
So my childhood was in a lot of different states. I lived throughout the West Coast. My mom, I had a lot of family that was based all over the country, so I lived with a lot of different family members. At 16, my mom had kicked me out for the last time. And at that point, I really was in a place where, unfortunately, I was very vulnerable and could have been a victim to a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. So I lived with different family members throughout Colorado, California, Northern and Southern California, and Nevada during that year and a half time period.
Okay. And from that time period, how did you actually enter into this world of being trafficked? What happened at that stage?
So my family was... there was a lot of moving around. There was not a lot of watching out for my care. Mm-hmm. And my last stop was Las Vegas. And when I got to Vegas with my dad at that point, it was definitely a a survival. I was in survival from 16 to 17, almost 18 years old when I got to my dad's. But Vegas was the hardest. I had spent some nights on the street. I was begging for bus money and for food money sometimes. And it was really relying on random people to try and get my needs met. And the day that I met my trafficker, I was actually planning on leaving to Ohio to move with a friend the next day. So that night I went to go visit my dad, and I thought this was going to be the last time in a while. And at that point, a car had pulled up when I was coming back up to my aunt and uncle's house to go to sleep that night. And in the car was a young girl and a young guy, and she asked me if I wanted to come party. So that's what caused me to get into the situation of sex trafficking that I was in.
So they baited you out of an attempt of friendship and an attempt to have fun and just party, forget about your problems, hang out with us.
Yeah, and I remember that night thinking that Vegas, I even said this on the phone to my friend in Ohio. I said, I just want one good memory of Vegas. Oh. I had felt like I was having the most struggles in Vegas of all the places I had lived. And I thought that when the car had pulled up, it was fate. Unfortunately, now I see fate was giving me one last time to have a good experience of Las Vegas before I left. So when I got into the car, we, hung out at their house a little bit, but they said they were going to drive me home so I could get to the Greyhound station the next day, but that was not their intent. And so just kind of played out the time until I missed my bus. I wasn't able to get on my bus.
So then you were in a super vulnerable situation.
Yes.
No bus. And then did you start catching wind at that point that everything was going to be different than what you thought it would be?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There was he lied to me. He said, unfortunately, he goes, well, if you work for me for 2 weeks, I'll give you money to get a Greyhound bus ticket and for food, and we'll take care of you during those 2 weeks. And he had no intention of doing that. He had no intention of letting me go. So it was
lies upon lies.
Yeah, the fraud piece of trafficking for those first 2 weeks, especially. So,
and through that, in your darkest days of being trafficked and going through that, how what kept you going in the worst days? So
I think for me, one of the most positive things about that time period from 16 to 17 was the fact that I had found God. I grew up in an atheist home. So when I was 17, I went to a church with my aunt, and I was able to start a relationship with God. And I think that if I didn't have that, I would have not been able to make it through that. So
you had hope beyond hope, even though there wasn't a lot of light at that moment in your life.
I think that I had completely surrendered to the idea of whatever God had wanted for me. It wasn't necessarily hope that I would make it out. It was just, this was what God wanted. His plan was in motion.
And there are some people that don't make it out. Is that right?
Yeah.
But for those who are caught in the middle, and you were fortunate enough to get out of this, how did that break happen? And you said it was about a year of your life, or what? How long was this time of being sex trafficked?
So typically when we look at like sex trafficking and situations of that, there's usually a time period that happens before trafficking. It's called grooming. And during that period of time, the trafficker is not going to traffic that person, but they're going to learn their history, their vulnerabilities. Some kids want love. Some kids need a place to stay. Some kids need this or that. And they're going to recognize whatever that is for that victim. In my situation, my trafficker did not groom me because he didn't have enough time to really get to know me. So I didn't have a love relationship with him. I didn't see him as a friend. And because of that, he had to use very violent tactics to keep me there. In most cases, this is a lot like domestic violence, where the victim is in love with the trafficker. And because of the level of violence I had experienced, my trafficking was relatively short.
Wow.
So it was about 4 months.
But 4 months can feel like a lifetime, I
Yes.
bet.
Yeah.
4 months can change your life forever. So how did you escape?
My trafficker saw that I was going to die. I had gangrene infection, and he let me walk around with it for 2 weeks, and my body deteriorated. And when my body was falling out on the floor, he sold me to another trafficker to try and sell me before I passed away. So he traded me for a car, a Chrysler 300.
Oh my gosh.
And that other trafficker had me for 4 days, and he said, I didn't pay for a dead body. You need to come pick her up. And then my trafficker came over, and I convinced him to, instead of taking me to the desert, to take me near the hospital. And I was able to get into the hospital. I was there for 2 weeks, and I was medically evac'd for my safety for another 2 weeks.
Wow.
In California.
Wow. And then what? I mean, was there anybody around you after that point, after the hospital? Did you have any safe person to talk to or safe place to go?
When I immediately got out of the hospital, well, when I got into the hospital, I had called my family members. And, I think that was, it could have been positive, but they were still the same people they were.
Yeah.
The only person who had had a life-changing experience was me at that point. So I went to California to live briefly with my aunt, and then I was back into a shelter. And I moved back to Colorado because my mom's based in Denver. That's where I was raised. And I came to Colorado Springs to restore Innocence.
Wow. So. Through that's where Diane comes into the picture, because as a mentor through Restore Innocence, not only were you able to come out of the life of trafficking, but you have a new life now. And a life that brings a lot of hope to a lot of other people. And Diane, through your mentorship, you guys were connected in how long ago?
We were connected in November of 2014, so 6 years ago.
6 years ago, this relationship and this special mentorship.
Yeah. And, when Jason, who was in charge of Restore at the time, called to ask me to be a mentor, he said, we're going to pick up this young woman, and her situation is different. Her story's hard because her trafficker was a guerrilla pimp, was the term he used.
Guerrilla pimp.
Yeah, which was a term I had never heard of. And he said not only did he use violence, but he actually tortured this young woman. And I can remember getting off the phone and just sobbing because of the little bit he had told me about what she had been through.
How old were you in that time, Annika?
I was 18.
18. And you were basically left for dead from a guerrilla pimp.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then you found out you probably in your life, human trafficking was not something that you had prior knowledge about until you became involved with Restore Innocence. Is that right?
That's right. I did not know that trafficking existed. I didn't know much about it.
Okay.
And then once I became involved with Restore, I learned more and more, heard more stories from the young women that Restore had worked with. But I had not heard a story that was that violent.
Oh.
So that was hard to walk into that space.
So, and Annika, there is something that I learned as we were talking before we were shooting this podcast, that you were in a house, right? In a neighborhood, in a home, and my life is housing, and I see it every day. So, I mean, things can be happening right under our noses, and we have no idea that it's happening, right? Can I ask you on trafficking and awareness about it? Is any, what do you see a particular age range? Is it all ages of people that can be trafficked? Is it, are you seeing that there's a wide variety of people that get chosen to be trafficked?
So I think that it's really about vulnerability. So anybody of any age can be vulnerable to traffickers. It's just finding that vulnerability. That being said, I do think traffickers are looking for younger victims. They're looking for people in their teen years, or that I think that vulnerable gap of getting on your own from 18 to 21. That's also another pretty common age group. But a single mom can be vulnerable to a trafficker. I know survivors who were single mothers before they were trafficked at 23, 25. It doesn't really matter necessarily the age. It's just that vulnerability, recognizing that, and however they can exploit that vulnerability.
And as you mentioned, it's the mental part too that keeps people enslaved into that lifestyle. So can I ask you, Annika, how did Restore Innocence, how were they kind of a bridge from your former life to your present life?
I think that the main thing I needed was support. I grew up with a single teen mom, so I had to become very independent very young. Mm-hmm. So it was just a matter of getting the support I needed emotionally, mainly. And then, of course, in that first year, that stability I needed of housing was huge. And then there was mainly support, that emotional support that came after that. And she still supports me, so.
And we all need somebody to see us through hard times in life. And without that person, it's very dire, right? And just to practically have somebody who has come alongside of you to love and treasure, to believe in you and to see you through to the point where you are now, that's an amazing testimony. It's an amazing story. So share, Annika, a little bit about what life is like for you now. What are you currently involved with?
So I work in the anti-human trafficking movement. I've been here for 4 years, and I like to focus on first responders who come into contact with victims of human trafficking. And I do the basic training for them to understand what human trafficking looks like. And then I also share from a survivor's perspective what they can say, or what can create barriers that they have when creating conversations with victims and things of that nature, and how to really create those rapport and relationships that they need to build to really have that victim get out of the life and stay out of the life.
Absolutely. So, I mean, you are a translator, in my opinion. It's like you're helping people to understand the language and to not make it worse on the victim. So there needs to be that translator in the middle so that people know how to understand and really. I mean, you've helped me and raised awareness in my own life today through this, and I see you as a very strong and an amazing woman who has overcome so much. And you are just an inspiration, not just about the trafficking part, but about life, that no matter how dark it gets, that that the most bleak and dire situation, don't give up hope, right? It sounds like you've maintained hope and it carried you through the worst of the times. And so thank you for sharing. Thank you for your presence here today. It makes a big difference. And I hope that it helps bring awareness so that people can get involved. So right here in Colorado Springs, let's talk about it. And even if you're not in Colorado Springs, people can become involved with Restore Innocence. And Diane, can you share a few ways that people might be able to get involved?
Yeah. There's several ways. I mean, of course, someone could become a mentor, a woman, because it's all girls or females that we work with. So you could go through the training and the process to become a mentor to a young woman who's been out of the life. You can donate to the mentor program. Like I flew out to Las Vegas to go to the trial with her. And so I was there for a week. And then.
So the gorilla was on trial.
Yes.
Yes. My trafficker was on trial. Yes.
And was convicted.
He was
all
convicted.
15 counts.
That is incredible.
Yes. So going out to Vegas and then went back out for his sentencing, where she read her victim impact statement, which was really powerful. And so those are all things that, need to be supported. And then, we do the restoration bag. So that, of course, and just praying with us. A big need is housing. And so right now we're trying to figure out a way that, that can be provided, because I know for Annika, that was a big thing, was she was a runner and didn't want to stay put. I mean, was scared. I mean,
Well,
rightfully so.
There wasn't a place of safety.
Right. And
Yeah.
so a big goal, from the beginning was making her feel safe, finding a safe place for her
Yes.
to be. And that was,
Absolutely.
a big commitment from me to her, was that I promise you, you will always have a safe place to stay. And